So recently I've been paying attention to a YouTube channel called Melonie Mac Go Boom, a news commentary channel who talks about drama, other YouTubers, and especially TV shows and movies, usually through a conservative mindset. Kinda like Critical Drinker, who I may get to eventually, though she reminds me mostly of Turkey Tom in the sense that I'm amazed by the fact that she still has a platform. Yeah, it's gonna be one of those types of commentaries. She made a video on the new Across the Spider-Verse trailer and how there was a trans flag in the background of one shot, and needless to say, I have some issues with what she said. Before I start though, I am aware that fellow commentator Communist Creeper covered the same video. However, his video is only 5 minutes long, and though short videos are not inherently a problem, there is so much wrong with the video to the point where I wanted to cover it myself.
So Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse saw massive success. I personally loved the movie, as did a lot of people, Spider-Man fans and otherwise. But after capitalizing on said success, their sequel seems to be shoehorning a ton of woke stuff, quite frankly.
A ton, as in literally just the trans flag in the background of one shot. Do you not know what a ton means? It kinda means that something has to happen several times in massive quantities. Quantities nuts! Unless there are other instances of woke stuff that you could have briefly mentioned, but like, guess what you don't do?
And the most egregious of them all is promoting the mutilation of children through a flag that says protect trans kids. Okay, and as we know, trans kids are about as real as a vegan cat. Okay, they don't make that decision for themselves.
This seems to be a common anti-trans talking point, that trans people mutilate themselves. It really is an assumption and a huge generalization to say this though. Unless there is a study that shows how most trans people do mutilate themselves, to which, go ahead Miss Boom, show your work. That's a trend I've seen with Melonie's videos. They are very lazily made, with her only going over one single article instead of citing multiple of them. Plus, reinforcing the misconception that trans people do mutilate themselves also reinforces negative stereotypes that trans people are mentally unstable, which is obviously not a good thing considering how the American government has already passed a crap ton of anti-trans legislation. And then there is the stuff about trans kids. As we know, trans kids are not real. So we are supposed to know this? So you're specifically arguing from the perspective that your audience already agrees with you. Good to know. And you say that they don't make this decision for themselves? Ignoring the lack of evidence again, are you saying that trans kids are made trans by their parents? I've heard stories that some parents do, and that is not a good thing, but what about the trans kids who figure out they're trans on their own? But apparently kids cannot feel like they just don't belong with their body they were given. You can argue and say, but they will regret being trans down the line, but how do you know that? Point is, kids are perfectly capable of making decisions. They make decisions every single day. This is why I've always hated arguments for banning puberty blockers. I'm over 6 feet tall and I used to think that I was a trans female. Turns out I'm not, but being over 6 feet is not considered a feminine quality by society, and it could lead to potential dysphoria for trans women who are tall. But no, kids are too stupid to make any decisions.
So let's dive into the video because there's a lot to talk about here, and the backlash is already real. Truny Toon Twitter is very upset at me over this, but what else is new? Anyway, so bounding into comics, they made this article in which they said Sony Pictures promotes child mutilation in latest trailer for Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse with Protect Trans Kids flag, and there it is right there. And then I said, well, I'm out. That's all he said. And of course, Truny Toons. Transphobic! Y'all are pathetic. Look at this. Every single one of them. Cartoon avatars. Cartoon anime in this case. Okay, this looks like Fire Emblem. But it's all cartoon Truny Toons.
Well, crap. I guess I gotta go change my avatar now. Hear that, guys? If your profile picture is drawn, your point is invalid. I gotta go delete both of my channels and my Twitter now. And you know what? Just for that, I am now an Easter Island head.
Now, when I first made the tweet, I got a lot of perfectly fine support for it. And most of it is. But just, the latest quote tweets are from the Truny Tune variety, and I'm pretty sure all of them have mental illnesses in their bio. It almost never fails. The more people rage at me and just read
dead meme
about whatever it is I have to say, when I click on their profiles, I quit letting it upset me, because when I click on their profile, there's always a mental illness listed in it. Every time. I mean, it almost never fails. This is just where we're at.
Question: what does mental illness in the bio even mean? Because most Twitter accounts don't say, oh, I have schizophrenia in my bio, or even, I have depression and anxiety in the bio, for example, since those are classified as mental illnesses. This point comes off as very ableist, because you are implying that there is something wrong with them attempting to argue with your position when they have mental illnesses in their bio, even though people with mental illnesses can still be correct. As I said, depression and anxiety are counted as mental illnesses, and yet they are still incredibly common. Or is this point referring to how people put pronouns in their bio? Because that's a perfectly fine thing to do. I myself have been mistaken for a woman because of my voice, so I have every reason to make people aware that I am a man, relatively speaking anyway. Like, this point is so vague, I have no idea what you are referring to.
And if people want to ask, oh, well, are you including transgender people in that? Oh, is transgender people or transgender a mental illness? Yes and no. I think it is, but I also think most of it is demonic. So if you want to ask my opinion on it, is being transgender a mental illness? I think it's demonic oppression more than anything.
Again, I am not exactly sure what this means. Obvious transphobia aside, it's not like you are even trying to argue that trans people are inherently mentally ill. I mean, there is a term to potentially argue for this: gender dysphoria, i.e. someone believing their biological sex does not align with how they see themselves. Even if, again, I see that as ableism and transphobia because of the context. Given how bigoted this video already is, you might as well bring up dysphoria as a talking point. But demonicism? Really? Like, I really don't think that religion should be used as the basis for an argument. That's not to say that religion has no place in anything ever. I used to be a Catholic myself, but arguments need to be more objective. And make no mistake, you are technically arguing for something. You're arguing for why the inclusion of the trans flag is disturbing. But inherently, we don't know if religion is or isn't correct as a concept. And arguments need a level of objectivity to them to be valid. They cannot be based on speculation, since speculation can always be wrong. And yes, Melonie did admit to being religious.
But that's a whole other discussion. Let's go ahead and get back to this video here, because some people are going to be like, well, it's not that big of a deal. It's a poster in Gwen's room, right? And that's it. It doesn't play a role in the movie. Well, of course it's subtle, because A, they can't globally release this otherwise, and they have to be able to have versions of it that are going to go to other regions that would not accept this.
Remember that time when real releases of Pixar's Lightyear got an R rating in countries like Malaysia and Singapore? Because there was a lesbian kiss in the film for like a second? Because I do.
And B, that's just how you start with brainwashing people. It's a slow process. It's like boiling a frog. People who want to introduce concepts and absolutely crazy things, like in this case, mutilating children, in order to normalize these kind of things, they have to go slow with it. They have to be subtle with it at first. Now, things aren't so subtle these days in society, but that slippery slope was real. That slippery slope that the boomers were warning us about, that we thought they were all crazy for, they were right, and it was real, and it is happening.
I like how she straight up acknowledges that her point is a slippery slope fallacy and still runs with it anyway. Like, if your point is entirely based on a slippery slope, chances are it's not valid. And like, how do you know that a trans flag that is barely in a movie trailer will lead to the acceptance of child mutilation? You say that the slippery slope exists, but like, how so? Also, something, not all trans people want their genitals rearranged, something, let people control their own lives and mind your own business, something.
All right. And don't even get me started on the first thing a lot of people think about when they transgender children, which we know isn't a thing, is we think of Jennings, and that has just been all over right now, because which I'm not going to hijack this video, just talk about that. But we see Jazz Jennings complaining to his mom about not feeling like himself. Okay, not feeling like himself, and then there was also like a painting he made, and then like this big quote that said something like, "Oh, maybe I'm in between, maybe I'm not all one or the other." I can't remember exactly what it said, but to me, what that sounded like was, okay, here's someone who's confused about a lot of things, and now the fact that his parents transitioned him at like 5 years old first, and then throughout, like that wasn't his choice, and now here he is stuck with his genitals cut off, and that's just a tragic scenario.
Finally, an example! It only took you 4 minutes to finally bring up one example, but even then, it's just one example. And though having one example is not inherently a bad thing, here it kinda is, since different people have different experiences. Like, this is only arguing from the perspective that trans kids never get a choice.
So what we've seen with Jazz Jennings, for example, is a tragedy. And I think a lot of people didn't realize the magnitude of it at first. I know I didn't. And then now just seeing, oh, it looks like there's starting to be some regret there, but it's just unfortunate in that case because the kid didn't have a choice in the matter. All right, so that's just where it's worse.
This video is very rambly and very repetitive. I get that it's probably unscripted, but to go, here's the story of Jazz Jennings, and then go, here's the story of Jazz Jennings, but again, it just makes me wonder what the heck is the point? You know, besides panning out the video because we like the 10-minute mark.
That's just where it's just, you cannot be promoting children being mutilated, and people say, oh, well, what about just blockers? They aren't doing surgery on kids. That's chemical mutilation, all right, because you cannot pretend that you can halt puberty that was designed to happen at a certain time of a child's life, and that you can halt it, and then when they're like 25 and say, oh, you know what, I want to go back. They're not going to have a natural puberty just the same. You can't tell me that a male is going to halt puberty and then when they're like 25 change their mind and want to go through it again, and that they're going to develop in that region as a normal male would if they went through puberty at a normal time.
You really do hate addressing schools of thought that are not your own. You assume that trans people will detransition when they grow older. I know this is gonna blow your mind, but not everyone thinks in the way that you do. Also, dang, you are really starting to sound like Helen Lovejoy.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
If this isn't an appeal to emotions, then I don't know what is.
And another thing, but I didn't get into the article yet because I'm just like way ahead of myself. But another thing is when you see, and like I'm seeing just on the quote tweets here and all this kind of stuff, you see online, you see everywhere, the LGBTQ community in general, but especially the trans community and the trans advocates are some of the most violent and aggressive people you could ever meet. Okay, so back when it was just like, oh, we want to exist, or we just want these people to exist, right? The allies. We just want them to be able to exist. Okay, that's, you know what? That's a lot easier to be. Okay, you just want to exist. You just want your friends to exist in their way. Whatever. Y'all don't need my approval, right? But now it's gotten to the point to where it's like, oh, you have to validate them. And if you don't validate them, and if you don't agree with everything they're doing and everything that they're pushing, then they want you to lose your jobs. They want you to lose your life in a lot of cases, right?
Oh boy, generalization! My favorite! Why is it such a common conservative talking point to essentially paint the LGBT community as this big hive mind?
This whole validate us or else type mentality, or validate them or else from the allies speaking, because they're aggressive too. So there's a lot of aggression and I think part of it too regarding, I mean, not to mention just the shooting that happened recently.
Oh, you mean the shooting that happened in Nashville, in Tennessee, which has doubled down on anti-LGBT legislation? Obviously, it was a bad thing, don't get me wrong, but like, connect the freaking dots, people. Throughout history, when they feel as if they have been wronged, as much as I disagree with the shooting itself, as obviously bad as the shooting itself was. So you can't really paint an entire group of people as violent. If transphobia is so great, then where is transphobia too?
But when you think about it, and like when I'm trying to think about it as a woman, dude, and I know other women will relate, and men who have wives and girlfriends and all that will know. Think about a woman how our hormones are fluctuating all the time. Now think about like when we're PMSing, like, bro, we can barely control our emotions. I mean, obviously we can control them, and it's no excuse to be rude or mean, or especially not violent or anything like that. But just think about the level of where women are, you know, a lot more emotional during PMS. Now think about a transgender person who is having artificial hormones pumped into their body. This is going to be a much more severe extent. So whenever we see that the transgender community are some of the most violent and aggressive people you can imagine are within the transgender community, well, what do you think's going to happen when you're artificially pumping hormones into somebody that's not natural?
I like how she tries to paint herself as not transphobic throughout this video, and yet now she's arguing that hormones are indeed a bad thing. Might have been unintentional, but I don't care. She's straight up saying that hormones make trans people violent. That's the kind of logic that gets more laws put on trans people, despite how trans people, you know, kind of feel better with having them, almost as if the hormones help them, you know, because they are trans. Just a thought.
Okay, because for women, it's natural for our hormones to fluctuate. We're naturally like that. And even so, it affects our emotions to a degree. Well, how much more is it going to affect somebody that has a bunch of artificial hormones pumped in them constantly? This is just common sense here.
I thought it was common sense to provide a source that proves that artificial hormones make people moodier, but I don't know, maybe that's just me.
Chicken.
On one hand, and I'll say for like up until fairly recent, I've just been like, hey, you know, they don't, as long as they're not hurting anybody, I'll use their pronouns, I'll do this, I'll do that. But I've gotten to a point where I'm not even comfortable using pronouns for the transgender community, the pronouns that they want. And it's not out of hate, and it's not out of anything like that, but it's more so just out of, it's starting to make me feel, I'm getting convicted for it as a Christian, because it's just like, it goes against God's design, okay? And it, like I just said earlier, I think there's a demonic element to it. So for me to use those pronouns, I'm starting to feel like, okay, wait a minute, this is, even though they know I don't approve of it, and even if I'm just trying to be nice and still use the pronouns, all that, I start to think, it's starting to make me feel wrong. Like, okay, maybe I shouldn't be doing that.
I like how using preferred pronouns is like the easiest thing in the world, and yet she still has to keep making excuses not to do so. How are you not a transphobe?
And again, like, hey, this might offend some people. And it's not to be rude. I have some friends who are transgender.
This is a common excuse that transphobes use in order to appear less bigoted. In fact, if you never said, I have trans friends, I would have never known that you have trans friends because of how fiercely bigoted you've been all video. For a comparison, an anti-LGBT politician has been found participating in gay activities. Does that suddenly make him any less of a homophobe? Not really. It's just a double standard. Alright, so here's a little guide to what to do when you feel like a bigot and you're hateful towards groups of innocent people. Okay, first of all, you want to go to this magical outside place called the outside. Okay, and then you want to find this green stuff, this patch of green stuff called grass. And what you want to do is you want to take out your hand and you want to put it towards the grass and you want to feel it. You want to feel it real good. Yeah, that's some nice grass here. I'm sorry I couldn't come up with a better ending for this video.